I learned that doing the right thing sometimes comes with a price nobody warns you about. On a Tuesday morning, I was watering my front lawn when a certified letter showed up in my mailbox, addressed to me by my full legal name. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I noticed the return address was from a law firm I hadn't heard from in over 20 years. Inside, there was a single photocopied document I recognized immediately, and a handwritten sticky note that wasn't meant for me to see. That's when I realized everything I believed about my past was about to fall apart. I learned the hard way that doing the right thing doesn't always feel right when the bill finally comes due. That Tuesday morning started like most of my mornings do now, quiet, predictable, almost rehearsed. I was outside by 8:15, standing barefoot on the cool concrete of my driveway, watering the narrow strip of lawn between my house and the sidewalk. The HOA liked things tidy, so did I. I moved the hose back and forth, counting the seconds in my head the way I always did. 10 for the grass, 5 for the flower bed. I had nowhere to be. That was the point of retirement, or so I'd told myself. The mail truck came down the street slower than usual, stopping at every other house. I watched it the way people do when they're not expecting anything but still half hoping for something. A catalog, a postcard, anything that said someone out there still remembered my name. When the truck stopped in front of my house, the driver got out instead of reaching across the cab. That should have been the first sign. He walked up my driveway and slid a single envelope into the mailbox, thicker than normal, stiff. I didn't move. I kept watering the lawn until he was back in his truck and halfway down the block. It took me a full minute to turn the hose off. The envelope was white, oversized, with my full legal name printed in block letters. Not Linda. Not Miss Carter. Linda Marie Carter. The name I used on tax forms, on employment contracts, on documents meant to last longer than feelings. The return address was from a law firm in downtown Dallas. I stood there longer than I should have. The envelope still inside the mailbox, my hand resting on the metal like it might burn me if I pulled it out too fast. I hadn't dealt with a law firm since I retired. Not officially. I paid my bills on time. I didn't sue people. People didn't sue me. That was one of the quiet rules I'd lived by for decades. Inside the house, the clock in the kitchen read 9:02. My coffee had gone cold. I carried the envelope to the table and set it down next to my mug, aligning the edges the way I always did. Old habits from years in human resources die hard. Paper tells the truth if you know how to read it. That's what I used to tell new hires. I opened the envelope carefully, sliding a finger under the seal instead of tearing it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. 2 were copies. 1 was original. The original was a notice, formal, polite, unsettling, in its calm language informing me that a concern had been raised regarding my conduct during my tenure as HR director at North Star Freight Solutions. North Star. I hadn't worked there in 7 years. My first thought was that they'd sent it to the wrong person. My second thought was that mistakes like that don't come from law firms. The copies behind the notice were worse. A photocopied internal memo, dated over 20 years ago. My signature at the bottom, slightly crooked, like it always was when I signed in a hurry. And beneath it, attached with a paperclip that had rusted just a little, was a yellow sticky note. No greeting, no explanation, just 4 words, written in blue ink. She remembers everything. I sat down because my legs didn't ask my permission first. The house was silent in that way it gets when you live alone long enough. No hum of another person moving around. No television in the background. Just the refrigerator kicking on and off, doing its job without complaint. I held the memo in my hands and felt something settle in my chest, not panic, not fear. Recognition. I knew exactly what this was about. I folded the papers back into the envelope and didn't look at them again. Not yet. I'd spent my entire career teaching people how not to react. Pause, breathe, get the facts. I went to the sink, poured the cold coffee out, rinsed the mug, and started a new pot. My hands shook just enough that I noticed. While the coffee brewed, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. "Hey sis, did you get the mail yet?" I stared at the screen until it went dark again. My sister Karen had been staying with me for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of spare room living, borrowed time, and half-finished conversations. She'd shown up one Sunday afternoon with 2 suitcases and a story that didn't quite add up. Something about a lease dispute. Something about needing space. I hadn't pressed. I rarely did with her. She was 10 years younger than me, technically my half-sister, though we never used that word growing up. Same mother, different fathers, different lives. I'd been the stable one, the one who planned ahead, the one who cleaned up after messes that weren't hers. Karen slept late, always had. I could hear the faint sound of her ceiling fan through the vent, a steady whir that told me she was still in bed. I didn't reply to the text. I poured the fresh coffee and carried it to the table, sitting across from the envelope like it was another person. 22 years ago, I'd signed that memo on a Thursday afternoon. Just before 5, I remembered the day because I'd missed my yoga class. There had been a complaint, a woman from the warehouse, payroll discrepancies, a supervisor who knew how to smile during meetings and raise his voice just enough on the floor to stay under the radar. The company wanted it handled quietly. At the time, I told myself I was protecting the system, that if I pushed too hard, everything would collapse and no one would benefit. I told myself I was choosing the lesser damage. I didn't think of it as silence. I thought of it as strategy. The coffee tasted bitter. I drank it anyway. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Karen's name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Almost immediately, there was a knock at the bedroom door, then footsteps in the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts, hair pulled into a loose knot, eyes already alert. Karen had always been quick to read a room. "You're up early," she said, glancing at the envelope on the table. "That's official looking." "It came for me," I said. "Well, obviously." She smiled, but it didn't quite land. "Everything okay?" I watched her pour herself coffee without asking, the way she always did, setting the pot back on the warmer a little too hard. She noticed the envelope again, closer this time. "Is that from Dallas?" she asked casually. "Yes." "Huh." She sat down across from me. "You haven't worked down there in forever." "No." Silence stretched between us. Not the comfortable kind. Karen tapped her fingernail against the mug once, then stopped. She reached into the envelope without asking. "Don't," I said. She froze, her hand still half inside. "Okay," she said slowly, pulling back. "I was just curious." "I know." She studied my face like she was trying to place a memory. "You look like someone just reminded you of something you hoped stayed buried." I didn't answer. Karen leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said lightly, "sometimes the past comes back because it wants to be dealt with properly this time." There it was, the odd thing. The comment delivered like an observation, not a warning. She stood up, rinsed her mug, and headed back down the hallway. "I'm going to take a shower," she said. "We can talk later." Later. I sat there alone again, the envelope still unopened, the sticky note still unseen by anyone else. Outside, the sun climbed higher, catching the edges of the framed certificates on the wall, proof of a career built on policies, procedures, and the belief that fairness could be managed. I picked up the envelope once more and turned it over in my hands. For the first time in years, I had the unmistakable feeling that something I'd built my life on was about to be questioned not by strangers, but by someone who knew exactly where to press. And I knew, with a clarity that made my stomach drop, that whatever was coming next wasn't about money or reputation alone. It was about a choice I'd made long ago, and this time, there would be no quiet way around it. Karen didn't come back into the kitchen after her shower. I heard drawers opening and closing in the guest room, the dull thump of a suitcase being shifted. She was always moving things around, even when she said she was staying put. I sat at the table longer than necessary, staring at the envelope until the words on the front stopped looking like language and started looking like shapes. By late morning, the sun had burned off the cool air. I changed out of my gardening clothes and into jeans and a clean blouse, the kind I used to wear to the office on days when I didn't expect meetings. Habit again, as if dressing a certain way might keep my thoughts in line. Karen finally emerged around 11, hair still damp, makeup minimal but deliberate. She carried her phone in her hand, scrolling as she walked. "You got plans today?" she asked, like it mattered. "I was going to run a few errands," I said. "Grocery store. Pharmacy." "I think." She nodded. "Mind if I tag along?" I did mind, but I didn't say it. I rarely did with her. "That's fine." We drove in silence for the first few minutes, the kind that fills a car when there are things both people are avoiding. Karen stared out the window, tapping her foot against the floor mat. I focused on the road, on the familiar turns of our neighborhood, the signs reminding drivers to slow down, to watch for children at play. "You seem tense," she said finally. "I got an unexpected letter." "I figured." She glanced at me. "Work stuff?" "Old work stuff." She smiled at that, quick and unreadable. Funny how that never really stays old. I didn't respond. We pulled into the grocery store parking lot, and she hopped out before I'd fully stopped, already walking toward the entrance like she'd been there 100 times before. Inside, she drifted away from me almost immediately, reappearing in different aisles with items she claimed we might need. I let her. It was easier than correcting her. At the checkout, she paid for nothing and thanked the cashier like she'd done us both a favor. In the car again, she finally asked the question she'd been circling all morning. "Does it have anything to do with North Star?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "Just a guess. You spent half your life there." "Not half," I said. "A third." She laughed softly. "Still a long time." Back at the house, I put groceries away while Karen sat at the counter, swinging her legs like she used to when we were younger. Watching her like that pulled me backward, to a version of us that existed before lawyers and memos and consequences. Karen had always been the one people worried about. She got into trouble early, skipped school, fell in with the wrong crowd. Our mother worked double shifts, and I learned quickly that being the older sister meant stepping in. I attended parent-teacher meetings. I paid for things when Mom couldn't. I smoothed things over. When Karen was 19, she called me from a payphone in the middle of the night. I remembered the sound of the line crackling, her voice shaking. She'd needed help. Again, I drove 2 hours without asking questions and brought her home. That was the pattern. Karen fell. I caught. "So," she said now, watching me line up cans in the pantry. "You gonna tell me what the letter says?" "It doesn't say much yet," I replied. "Just that there's a concern. Someone raised an issue." "Someone," she repeated. "That's vague." Intentionally, Karen leaned forward, resting her chin in her hand. "You were good at your job, too good, sometimes." I paused. "What do you mean by that?" "You knew how to make things go away," she said lightly. "Complaints, problems, people." I closed the pantry door a little harder than necessary. "I followed policy." She smiled. "Of course you did." I carried the groceries to the fridge, buying myself time. When I turned back, Karen was looking at the envelope on the table. She hadn't touched it, but she was close enough that I could tell she was reading the return address again. "Dallas," she said. "That's serious." "It's a law firm," I replied. "That's what they do." She tilted her head. "You ever think about that woman?" The question landed heavier than she'd intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. "Which woman?" I asked, though I already knew. "The one from the warehouse," Karen said. "The one who filed the complaint." I stared at her. "You don't know anything about that." She raised an eyebrow. "I know you came home late a lot that year. I know you stopped talking about work for a while. And I know Mom asked me once if you were okay. And you said you were just tired. That doesn't mean." "It means you carried something," she interrupted. "You always do." I sat down across from her, the space between us suddenly smaller. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then set it face down on the counter. because the past doesn't disappear just because you outlive it. There was that calm tone again, observational, almost rehearsed. That afternoon, after Karen went out for a walk, I finally opened the envelope again. I read every line carefully this time. The notice was clear. A preliminary inquiry had been reopened following the submission of new information. They requested my cooperation, voluntary, for now. The memo behind it was worse than I remembered. I'd approved a transfer instead of a termination, a lateral move framed as a solution. The complaint closed, no further action. At the time, I'd convinced myself it was a compromise. At the bottom of the page, beneath my signature, was a handwritten note I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't mine. Handled per directive. I didn't remember writing that. I didn't remember anyone asking me to. The sticky note fell out of the envelope when I turned the page over. I picked it up carefully, like it might change if I looked at it too long. She remembers everything. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Not Karen's, not anyone I'd worked with. I turned the note over, blank on the back. No explanation, no initials. When Karen came back, she was in a better mood. Cheeks flushed, hair loose from the knot. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "I read it," I replied. And it's about something I thought was settled." Karen nodded. "Things like that rarely are." I studied her face. "Why did you ask about the warehouse?" She didn't answer right away. She took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. "Because people are talking," she said. "Who?" "Old coworkers, online, in forums." She shrugged. "Stuff travels, and you just happened to hear?" She smiled, small and knowing. "I hear things." The room felt warmer suddenly. "Did you talk to anyone about me?" Karen laughed. "Relax. I didn't start anything." But, she said softly, "if someone wanted to reopen old wounds, they'd need someone who remembered the details." I stood up. "Karen, if you know something," she met my eyes. "You always told me the truth mattered, even when it was inconvenient. I also told you timing matters." She smiled again, and this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Then I guess it's just bad timing." That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, the soft creaks and pops of a structure built to last but not to explain itself. Down the hall, Karen's door was closed. I heard the murmur of her voice through the wall, low and careful, like she didn't want to be overheard. I didn't get up. I didn't knock. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. The letter hadn't arrived by accident, and Karen hadn't shown up at my door by coincidence. Whatever was coming next had been in motion long before that Tuesday morning, and for the first time, I wondered whether all the times I'd stepped in to protect her had taught her something dangerous, how to use silence the same way I once had. Karen's routine settled into the house quickly, like she'd never left. She took over the guest room dresser, lined her toiletries along the bathroom sink as if they'd always belonged there, and learned the rhythm of my mornings without asking. Coffee at 7, news on mute, shoes by the door, always facing out. I noticed these things because I noticed everything. That was another habit I'd never managed to shake. By Thursday, the neighbors had seen her enough times to start waving differently. Not the polite, distant wave I was used to, but the curious one, the head tilt, the lingering look. Karen had a way of changing the temperature of a room just by entering it. People leaned in around her. They always had. That afternoon, I was in the backyard pruning the rose bushes when she came outside, phone in hand. "You ever hear of a woman named Elaine Parker?" she asked. I clipped a dead stem and dropped it into the bucket. "No." "Warehouse supervisor. Early 2000s. Worked under you, technically." My grip tightened on the shears. "Why are you asking?" She shrugged. "Someone tagged me in a comment thread. Old LinkedIn group, people reminiscing about North Star. Her name came up." I straightened slowly. "And you're in LinkedIn groups now?" "Everyone is," she said. "You'd be surprised what people talk about when they think time has buried it." I went back to the roses. Elaine Parker filed a complaint. It was investigated. Just about. Karen leaned against the fence. Was it? Yes. She waited. I did my job, I added. I didn't say you didn't. Her voice was calm, too calm. I'm just saying her name is circulating again, along with yours. I didn't respond. The air was thick with late summer heat, cicadas buzzing like static. Karen watched me work for a moment, then smiled faintly. You always did like to stay ahead of things, she said. Control the narrative. He relighted. That evening, after dinner, she pulled out her laptop and settled at the dining table. I noticed she angled the screen slightly away from me, not enough to hide it, just enough to suggest privacy. What are you working on? I asked. Nothing important, she replied, just catching up. I washed dishes longer than necessary, listening to the click of keys, the occasional pause. When I dried my hands and turned around, she'd closed the laptop. Linda, she said, using my full name the way she only did when she wanted something. Can I ask you a hypothetical question? I sat down across from her. You already are. If someone made a mistake years ago, she said carefully, but they believed at the time it was the least harmful option, do you think they deserve to have their whole life torn apart over it? I considered her words. Depends on who paid the price for that mistake. She nodded. Fair. Do. And why are you asking? Karen folded her hands. Because people are starting to reframe old stories. And once that happens, context doesn't matter much anymore. What people? She hesitated, just a fraction too long. Advocacy types, journalists, former employees. I felt a slow, creeping pressure behind my eyes. And you're in contact with them? Indirectly, she smiled. You taught me how to network. The next morning, the HOA newsletter arrived in my inbox. Normally, I skimmed it. Yard reminders, pool hours, that kind of thing. This time, a line halfway down caught my attention. Reminder: please direct any media inquiries to the HOA board. Individual residents are not authorized to speak on behalf of the community. Media inquiries. I printed the email and set it next to the law firm letter. 2 pieces of paper, unrelated on the surface, suddenly felt connected. When Karen came into the kitchen, I pointed to the printout. What does this mean? She read it, then shrugged. Probably nothing. You don't think it's strange? I think HOAs like to feel important, she said. You know that. I studied her face. Have you spoken to anyone about me? Karen met my gaze without blinking. I've told people you're my sister. That's not what I asked. She sighed. Linda, I haven't dragged your name through the mud, if that's what you're worried about. End quote. But, she continued, if someone already knows where to look, that's not my fault. I stood. Karen, you showed up here with no warning. A law firm contacts me out of nowhere, and now my HOA is talking about media. You're not going to tell me this is all coincidence. She leaned back in her chair. I'm telling you that things move whether we want them to or not. That afternoon, my phone rang, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up. This is Mark Reynolds with the Dallas Observer. I'm hoping to speak with you regarding your time at North Star Freight Solutions. I listened to the message twice. Karen was in the other room. I could hear her moving around, humming softly, like it was any other day. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. I didn't give him your number, she said. But I did confirm you still live here. My chest tightened. You had no right. I didn't lie, she replied. I just didn't protect you. It's all the words hung between us. I protected you for years, I said quietly. And I appreciated it, she said. But I'm not asking for protection now. I'm asking for honesty. From me? From yourself, she corrected. That night, I sat alone in the living room while Karen took a call in the backyard. The sliding door was open just enough for me to hear fragments, not names, not details, just tone, careful, persuasive, familiar. When she came back inside, she looked almost relieved. They're moving faster than I expected, she said. Who? She smiled, thin and unapologetic. People who think the truth deserves daylight. And you agree with them? She considered that. I think the truth always comes out. The only question is who controls how. I realized then that this wasn't about helping me prepare. It wasn't about warning me. Karen wasn't standing beside me. She was standing at the intersection, deciding which way the traffic would flow. As I went to bed, my phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from the law firm, requesting a meeting. And beneath it, forwarded from an address I didn't recognize, was a single line. We'd like to give you the opportunity to tell your side before someone else does. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. For the first time, I understood that the danger wasn't the investigation or the press or even the past itself. It was the person who knew exactly which version of me the world would believe. And she was sleeping down the hall. By Friday morning, the house felt smaller. Nothing had changed physically. The walls were the same pale beige I'd painted 5 years ago. The furniture hadn't moved. The air conditioning hummed along at its usual setting. But something invisible had settled into the space, something that made every sound sharper and every silence heavier. Karen was already awake when I came into the kitchen. She stood at the counter scrolling through her phone, coffee untouched beside her. You sleep? She asked without looking up. Enough, I said. She nodded, like she expected that answer. I'm going to head out for a bit. Meet someone for lunch. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask where. We were past that stage. Be back for dinner? She smiled. We'll see. After she left, I sat at the table and opened my laptop. I typed my own name into the search bar before I could talk myself out of it. For years, I'd told employees never to Google themselves during an investigation. It rarely helped, but I wasn't an employee anymore. At first, there was nothing new. Old LinkedIn profiles, a retirement announcement from North Star's internal newsletter, a photo from a charity 5K I barely remembered running. Then I scrolled. A forum post from 2 days ago, anonymous, speculative, careful with its language, but pointed enough to land. Someone had asked whether any former HR leaders from North Star might be relevant to a story resurfacing about systemic misconduct in the early 2000s. Below it, a reply. Linda M. Carter was HR director at the time, worth looking into. No accusation, no details, just a breadcrumb. My phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor, Diane, 2 houses down. Hey, random question, are reporters really calling around the neighborhood? HOA sent a weird email. I stared at the message longer than necessary before replying. I don't know anything about reporters. Probably a misunderstanding. The lie sat badly with me, but it was the closest thing to truth I could offer. When Karen came back that afternoon, she was in a good mood. Too good. She dropped her purse on the counter and kicked her shoes off by the door. Traffic was awful, she said. Dallas is a mess. You went into the city? I asked. She raised an eyebrow. You sound surprised. As a matter, I am. She poured herself a glass of water. I told you. I'm meeting people. You didn't tell me who. She took a sip, watching me over the rim of the glass. Does it matter? Yes, I said. When it involves my life, it matters. Karen set the glass down slowly. You always frame things like that, as if everything is happening to you. I folded my arms. This is happening to me. Is it? She asked softly. Or is it just catching up? That evening, I received another voicemail. This one, from a different number. Miss Carter, this is Julia Nguyen. I'm representing a former North Star employee in a civil matter. I'd like to discuss your role in a personnel decision from 2002. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it twice. Not out of denial, but because I knew what it would say. Karen watched me from the doorway. You don't have to do this alone, she said. I turned to her. Then, stop talking to people behind my back, she said. Linda, if I don't talk, someone else will. That doesn't make it right. No, she agreed. It makes it inevitable. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake replaying old meetings in my head. The conference room with the flickering light. the stack of complaints no one wanted to touch, the phone call from corporate legal reminding me about exposure. At the time, I'd believed I was choosing stability over chaos. Now, I wasn't so sure. Saturday morning brought its own shift. I stepped outside to get the paper and found Diane at the end of her driveway, phone pressed to her ear. She waved when she saw me, then lowered her voice. "I'll call you back," she said, hanging up. "Hey, Linda." "Morning." She hesitated. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said too quickly. She nodded, but her eyes lingered. "If you need anything, well, you know." "I do." Back inside, Karen was sitting at the table, laptop open. This time, she didn't angle the screen away. On it was an email chain. Names blurred out, dates highlighted. "Why are you looking at that?" I asked. "Because it's already out there," she replied. Pretending otherwise won't help. I leaned over her shoulder despite myself. The emails were familiar, old, internal. I recognized my own phrasing in one of them. "Where did you get this?" Karen didn't answer right away. "Someone shared it." "With you?" "Yes." "Why?" She finally looked at me. "Because you're still protecting the version of yourself that only exists in your head." "That's unfair." "Is it?" she asked. "You taught me that power isn't about what you do, it's about what you allow to be documented." I straightened. "I taught you to be careful." "And you were," she said. "Very." The realization settled slowly, painfully. Karen wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She knew exactly what I'd done and what I hadn't. That afternoon, a car I didn't recognize idled across the street for a full 10 minutes. I watched from the living room window as someone inside raised a camera, then lowered it when I stepped back. When I told Karen, she didn't seem surprised. "People like visuals," she said. "Make stories feel real." "You could stop this," I said. She shook her head. "I could slow it down, maybe, but stopping it?" She smiled sadly. "That would require pretending nothing happened." "Is minus. And you don't want that?" "I want resolution," she said. "For everyone." "Everyone," I repeated. "Or you?" Karen stood. "I'm tired of being the one who fell through the cracks." I watched her walk down the hall, her words echoing behind her. For years, I'd believed I was the responsible one, the stable one, the person who absorbed damage so others wouldn't have to. Now, as my phone buzzed again, another unknown number, another request for comment, I wondered if all that stability had simply given someone else room to decide when my silence would become a weapon. And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether the storm gathering outside my front door was meant to expose me, or to finish something I'd left undone. The first real proof arrived on a Monday morning, tucked between a grocery coupon flyer and an electric bill. It wasn't addressed to me by name, just the house number, no return address, no stamp I recognized. Someone had driven by and placed it in the mailbox by hand. I stood in the entryway holding the envelope, my purse still on my shoulder, keys digging into my palm. Karen was in the living room, feet tucked under her on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing in the world was urgent. "You get the mail?" she asked without looking up. "Yes," I said. "That one looks serious." Of course she knew. I didn't open it right away. I set my purse down, hung my keys on the hook, took my shoes off carefully. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, drying them slowly, buying myself time. Only then did I slide a finger under the flap. Inside was a USB drive, black, unmarked, cheap plastic, the kind companies used to give away at conferences. No note, no explanation, just the weight of it in my palm. Karen glanced over. "What is it?" "You tell me," I said. She raised her eyebrows. "Not mine." I didn't believe her, but belief had become slippery lately. I walked past her and into my home office, closing the door behind me. The room still smelled faintly of paper and toner, even though I hadn't printed anything in months. Framed certificates lined the wall. Years of professional validation, all very neat, very official. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered. then populated with folders, dates, names, familiar structures. Someone had organized this carefully. The first file I opened was labeled Parker, Elaine, 2002. My stomach tightened. Inside were scanned documents, the original complaint, handwritten notes from interviews, email exchanges between me and corporate legal. I scrolled slowly, recognizing my own words, my tone, calm, measured, strategic. Then I saw something I hadn't seen before, an audio file. I clicked it. At first, there was static, then a woman's voice, tired, controlled, older than I remembered, or maybe memory had softened her edges. "This is Elaine Parker," the voice said. "I'm recording this because every time I try to explain what happened, it gets reduced to policy language. I want my words on record." I closed my eyes. I remembered that meeting. I remembered how she'd sat across from me, hands folded, eyes fixed on a crack in the conference room table. I remembered telling her the process would protect everyone involved. The recording continued. They told me it was being handled, that moving him would solve the problem. But nothing changed for me. I was the one who got labeled difficult. My chest ached, not sharply, but deeply, like something pressing from the inside. I stopped the recording. When I opened my eyes, Karen was standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't listen to that alone," she said. "You knew this existed," I replied. She didn't deny it. I knew she'd kept records. How? Karen stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She's not the only one who remembers. I turned the laptop toward her. "Where did this come from?" She sighed. "A journalist reached out to me, asked if I knew anything about North Star. I told him my sister worked there." "Azar, you didn't just tell him that." "No," she admitted. "I told him you were the one who made the call." The words landed cleanly. No drama, no anger, just truth, spoken plainly. I laughed once, short and humorless. "You sold me out." "I gave context," she said. "There's a difference. For you." "For her," Karen corrected. "For people like her." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You had no right." Karen's expression hardened. "You had every right back then, didn't you?" That afternoon, the second piece of evidence arrived digitally, an email forwarded to me by a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. "Thought you should see this. They're building a case." Attached was a draft article, not published yet, carefully written, balanced, even. My name appeared 3 times, always with qualifiers. Former HR director, oversaw internal review, declined to comment. At the bottom was a note from the journalist. "If you'd like to respond before publication, I'm happy to include your statement." Karen read it over my shoulder. "They're being generous," she said. "They're being strategic." Same thing. That evening, I drove alone to the grocery store, just to get out of the house. In the parking lot, I noticed a man leaning against a car, phone in hand, watching the entrance. When our eyes met, he looked away too quickly. Inside, the aisles felt narrower. I caught snippets of conversations, laughter, the beep of scanners, ordinary life continuing, indifferent to my unraveling. At checkout, the cashier hesitated when she saw my name on the credit card. "Hey," she said, squinting slightly. "Are you the one from that article?" "What article?" I asked. She flushed. "Sorry, never mind." I drove home with the radio off, hands steady on the wheel, heart racing anyway. Karen was waiting when I got back. "They're pushing," she said. "So are you." "I know." She didn't argue. "I told you this would happen. You engineered this." Her jaw tightened. I accelerated it. "Why?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" She looked tired suddenly. "Older. I want you to stop pretending you were just a cog." I stared at her. "You think I enjoyed it? Making those calls? I think you lived comfortably with them." That night, I listened to the rest of the recording. Elaine's voice wavered at times, steadied at others. She spoke about retaliation, about being transferred to a windowless office, about eventually leaving. I don't need them to admit guilt, she said near the end. I need them to admit I existed. I shut the laptop slowly. For years, I'd told myself the outcome hadn't been perfect, but it had been survivable. I hadn't considered who did the surviving. When I stepped into the hallway, Karen was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. She looked smaller like that, less sure. She's not asking for money, Karen said quietly. She wants acknowledgement. And you? I asked. She looked up at me. I want you to choose. Between what? Between protecting your version of the past, she said, and telling the truth about it. The next morning, my lawyer called back. He'd reviewed the materials I'd sent. This isn't nothing, he said carefully, but it's not criminal. The risk here is reputational. And ethically? There was a pause. That's a different conversation. I sat at the kitchen table long after the call ended, the USB drive resting between my hands like a small, solid accusation. Karen passed by, pausing just long enough to say, "They'll keep digging." I know. And the longer you wait. I know, I repeated. She nodded, satisfied, and walked away. Alone again. I stared at the evidence laid out in front of me, emails, memos, voices I'd tried not to remember. For the first time, the story wasn't being shaped around me. It was being shaped through me. And I understood, with a clarity that left no room for comfort, that silence was no longer a shield. It was the final exhibit. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was procedural. That was the only way I could describe it, the way everything slowed down into steps, decisions, margins. I woke up earlier than usual, before the sun, and lay still listening to the house breathe. Karen's door was closed. No voices, no movement. For the first time since she arrived, I didn't feel watched. I felt measured. I made coffee and didn't drink it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began to write. Not notes, not arguments, facts, date, role, decision, outcome. I wrote the way I'd trained others to write after an incident. Strip emotion, anchor in sequence, tell the truth without decoration. By the time the sun rose, I had filled 4 pages. What surprised me wasn't what I remembered. It was what I'd forgotten on purpose. There had been a meeting before Elaine Parker filed her complaint. An informal one. No minutes taken. Corporate legal on the phone. Operations director in the room. The supervisor in question was mentioned only briefly as a risk variable. The focus had been on exposure, on precedent. I had asked one question that day. Can we move him without admitting fault? At the time, it had felt like pragmatism. Now, written down in ink, it looked like avoidance. Karen came into the kitchen around 9. She glanced at the papers in front of me but didn't comment. Instead, she poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." I didn't respond. I finished writing the sentence I was on, capped the pen, and set it down. "I'm not doing what you think I'm going to do," I said. Karen raised an eyebrow. "I haven't said what I think. You don't need to." I pushed the legal pad toward her. "I'm not signing anything new. I'm not revising the past to make it easier for anyone." She skimmed the page, her expression tightening. "Then what are you planning?" "I'm going to tell it exactly as it happened," I said, "including the parts that make me uncomfortable." Karen laughed quietly. "That's not how this works. It is for me." She set the pad down. "Linda, if you go out there and frame yourself as complicit, they'll eat you alive." "I was complicit," I replied. Her eyes sharpened. "Careful." "No," I said calmly. "Accurate." The word hung between us. Karen straightened. "You think that absolves you? Admitting it?" "I'm not looking for absolution." "Then what are you looking for?" I thought of Elaine's voice on the recording, the way she said she wanted to be acknowledged, not compensated, not avenged, seen. "I'm looking for ownership," I said. Something I avoided back then. Karen shook her head. "You're still trying to control it." "Yes," I agreed, "but not the outcome." She studied me for a long moment, then smiled, a real one, or close to it. You always did need to feel clean. This isn't about cleanliness, I said. It's about stopping the drift. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer in person. His office was quiet, understated, the kind of place designed to calm people who were about to hear things they wouldn't like. He listened as I walked him through the timeline, occasionally asking clarifying questions, never interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You're proposing voluntary disclosure, he said. I am. And you understand what that means? Yes. He nodded slowly. Legally, you're not required to do this. I know. Strategically, it may not be wise. I know. Then why? I thought for a moment. Because someone else already is. And I don't trust their version. He smiled thinly. That's honest. I don't want to be defended, I continued. I want to be precise. After the meeting, I drove home without turning on the radio. I needed the silence to stay intact. When I pulled into the driveway, Karen's car was gone. Inside, the house felt lighter. Or maybe emptier. I wasn't sure which. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing. Not cleaning, organizing. I pulled boxes from the closet, sorted old files, labeled folders. Each document had its place, each decision, its context. I created a timeline not to justify myself, but to remove ambiguity. At 6, Karen returned. She dropped her keys on the counter and looked around. You've been busy, end quote. I have. She noticed the boxes. You're preparing. Yes. For what? For questions, I said. For the right ones. Karen crossed her arms. You're making yourself the center of this. I always was, I replied. I just pretended I wasn't. Her jaw tightened. You think this helps, Elaine? I think it stops me from hiding behind process. She shook her head. You're going to lose people. I already am. That night, I wrote my statement. Not for the press. For myself. It was 5 pages long. No apologies dressed as explanations. No distancing language. I named the decision. I named my role. I named the cost. I slept better than I had in days. The next morning, I sent the statement to my lawyer, with a note. This is the version I stand by. By noon, my phone was buzzing again. Messages, requests, questions. Karen watched me from the doorway as I listened to a voicemail from the journalist. This changes things, he said. We'd like to include your full statement. Good, I said aloud. Karen stared at me. You're handing them the knife. I'm removing the blindfold. She exhaled sharply. You really believe this ends well? No, I said. I believe it ends honestly. She turned away. You always were infuriating. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from Elaine Parker's attorney. It was brief. We've reviewed your statement. Miss Parker appreciates the clarity. She has one request, that you speak directly. I read it twice. Karen hovered nearby. What is it? She wants to talk, I said. Karen's eyes flicked to the screen. And? And I think I should. Karen scoffed. Why put yourself through that? Because she carried something for 20 years. I replied. I can carry one conversation. Karen was quiet for a long time. You know, she said finally, this doesn't give you the moral high ground. I'm not trying to climb, I said. I'm trying to stop sinking. That evening, we ate dinner in near silence. The tension between us had shifted. It wasn't sharper, it was clearer. Karen wasn't pushing anymore. She was watching. As I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, tired, but steady. For the first time since the letter arrived, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever consequences followed, it would no longer be shaped by what I'd failed to do in the past. It would be shaped by what I was finally willing to say out loud. Elaine Parker's voice came through the phone, quieter than I expected. Not weak, measured, as if she'd learned long ago that volume didn't change outcomes. Thank you for agreeing to speak, she said. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I replied. We'd scheduled the call for mid-morning, after Karen left the house. She'd said she was running errands, but neither of us pretended that was the real reason she went. This conversation didn't need an audience. Elaine didn't waste time. "I read your statement," she said. "It's more than I expected." I closed my eyes briefly. "It's still not everything." "No," she agreed. "But it's closer." There was a pause. I waited for accusation, for anger sharpened by years of rehearsal. It didn't come. "I want to understand something," Elaine said. "When you decided not to escalate my complaint, what did you think would happen to me?" The question landed squarely. Not emotionally, structurally, like a missing piece finally placed where it belonged. "I thought you'd stay," I said slowly. "I thought you'd keep your job. I thought the transfer would quiet things down. And when it didn't, I told myself that wasn't my decision anymore." Elaine exhaled. "That's what I thought you'd say." I gripped the edge of the desk. I was wrong. "Yes," she said simply. "You were." We talked for almost an hour, about details I hadn't revisited in decades, about meetings I remembered differently, about the space between policy and people, where things are lost quietly. When we finished, Elaine said, "I don't need you to fix this. I know. I need you to stop standing between it and daylight." "I will." She hesitated. "Your sister called me." The room seemed to tilt. "When?" I asked. "Last week," Elaine replied. "She said she wanted to understand my side. She said she thought you'd been pressured. And—" Elaine was quiet for a moment. She asked if I'd consider a public statement, one that focused on decision makers. I felt something harden in my chest. "Did you agree?" "No," Elaine said, "because it felt like a trade." "For what?" "For control," she replied. "I'm done with that." When the call ended, I sat very still. The house was silent, but not empty. I could feel the weight of everything that had shifted subtly, decisively. Karen came home an hour later. She didn't bother with small talk. "You spoke to her?" I excited. "Yes." Karen dropped her bag on the chair. And she told me you called her." Karen didn't flinch. I did. "Why?" She leaned against the counter. "Because she deserves a voice." "That wasn't your call." Karen laughed softly. "Everything is your call, until it isn't." I took a breath. "What did you promise her?" "Nothing," Karen said. "I asked questions." "You framed me," I said quietly. You tried to redirect her anger. Karen's eyes sharpened. "I tried to clarify responsibility. For your benefit." "For the truth," she snapped. "No," I said. "For leverage." The word hung between us, undeniable, now that it had a name. Karen crossed her arms. "You think you're the only one who's ever paid for your decisions? I think you're using mine to settle something else." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what it's like to be the afterthought, the problem child, the one who never gets taken seriously." I met her gaze. "And you don't know what it's like to live with the weight of a choice you rationalized because it made you useful." She looked away. "I'm not going to let you rewrite this," I continued. "Not for me. Not for Elaine." Karen turned back, anger flashing. "Then, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to speak for myself," I said. "And then I'm going to step aside." "That's not how this works." "It is if I refuse to play." She shook her head. "You're throwing away whatever protection you still have." "I never had protection," I replied. "I had proximity." Karen paced the kitchen, restless. "You don't understand how this looks." "I do," I said. "I've been managing optics my entire adult life." She stopped. "Then you know what happens next?" "Yes," I said. "You lose your angle." Her laugh was sharp. "You think this is about me?" "I think you made it about you." The silence stretched. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of her. "I didn't plan for it to go this far," she said. "That's never stopped you before." She stared at the floor. "I thought if I pushed you, you'd finally admit it." "I have. Publicly?" "I will." Karen's eyes lifted. "And where does that leave me?" The question was rawer than the others. less strategic. I softened my voice. It leaves you without something to push against. She swallowed. I needed you to stop being untouchable. I was never untouchable, I said. I was just quiet. That evening, the journalist sent over the final draft. My statement ran nearly in full. The framing was careful, honest, but not theatrical. Karen read it silently, jaw clenched. You're taking responsibility, she said. Yes, and you're not naming names. No, that protects people who don't deserve it. It prevents a feeding frenzy, I replied. There's a difference, Karen scoffed. You're still managing this. I'm managing myself, I said, not the fallout. She handed the laptop back. You know they'll still speculate. I know. And I'll still be asked questions. I know. Karen stared at me. You could have let me handle this. I did, I said gently. For years. In other ways. Her expression shifted hurt, anger, something like regret. I thought you'd fight me, she said. I'm fighting for something else. That night, Karen packed a bag. I need space, she said, not meeting my eyes. I think that's wise. She paused at the door. You're choosing her over me. I shook my head. I'm choosing not to choose between women who were harmed differently by the same system. She laughed bitterly. Always the mediator. Not anymore, I said. When the door closed behind her, the house exhaled. Not in relief, in finality. I sat at the kitchen table long after, staring at the empty chair where she'd been. For years, I'd believed my silence had been a form of care. For Karen, for the company, for myself. Now, with everything in motion, I understood something I hadn't before. Silence doesn't just protect, it teaches others how to use it. And this time, I wasn't going to pass that lesson along. The house was quieter without Karen, but not calmer. It took a few days for me to understand the difference. Quiet was just the absence of noise. Calm required something else, resolution, maybe, or acceptance. I had neither yet. On Monday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside it, the same way I used to prepare for difficult meetings. Only this time, I wasn't representing a company, I was representing myself. And that felt unfamiliar in a way I hadn't expected. The article went live at 9:03 a.m. I didn't refresh the page. I didn't need to. My phone began buzzing within minutes. Texts first, then calls, former colleagues, an old supervisor, a woman from accounting I barely remembered, saying she was glad I'd finally said something, though she wasn't sure what exactly. I let most of them go to voicemail. Instead, I read the article slowly, line by line, the way I'd been trained to read contracts. There were no surprises. My statement appeared exactly as I'd approved it. No inflammatory language, no speculation presented as fact, just a clean timeline and a clear acknowledgement of my role. Still, seeing my name there connected to a story I'd worked so hard to compartmentalize made my chest tighten. At 10:15, my lawyer called. So far, reactions are mixed, he said, which is about what we expected. Any immediate fallout? I asked. Nothing formal yet. A few inquiries, some posturing. He paused. You did what you said you would. Yes. There was a brief silence on the line. I know this wasn't the safest route. I didn't choose it for safety. I know. After the call, I stood at the window and watched a delivery truck idle across the street. The driver checked his phone, then glanced at my house, then away again. I couldn't tell if it meant anything, and I was tired of guessing. That afternoon, Elaine emailed me. I read it. Thank you for not minimizing it. I replied simply, thank you for trusting me with your voice. It wasn't enough, but it was honest. Around 3, there was a knock at the door. Not sharp or urgent, just firm enough to demand attention. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting another reporter, a neighbor with questions, or Karen standing there with a change of heart. Instead, it was a woman I didn't recognize, maybe in her 40s, holding a folder. Miss Carter? She asked. Yes. I'm with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We're reopening a review tied to North Star Freight Solutions. I'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. I stepped aside without thinking. Of course. We sat at the dining table. She took notes, asked careful, neutral questions. I answered them the same way, precisely, without defensiveness, without embellishment. When she left, she said, "This will take time. I understand. And there may be requests for further clarification. I'll be available." That night, I cooked dinner for one and ate it standing up, plate balanced on the counter. I wasn't hungry, but I needed the routine. Afterward, I sorted through the last box of old files I'd pulled from the closet. At the bottom was a notebook I didn't remember keeping. Inside were shorthand notes from meetings long past dates, initials, arrows connecting decisions to outcomes. On the final page, written in my own hand, was a sentence I didn't remember writing. "If I don't decide, someone else will." I closed the notebook slowly. Karen texted later that night. "You look composed in the article." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. That wasn't the goal. There was no response. The next few days blurred together. More emails, more calls, some angry, some grateful. A former North Star employee reached out to say she wished I'd spoken up sooner. Another said she admired my courage, though she wasn't sure she could forgive the delay. I didn't argue with either of them. On Thursday, my lawyer forwarded me an email from Karen. She'd contacted him directly. "I'm concerned my sister is being unfairly targeted. I have information that could contextualize her decisions." I closed my eyes. When Karen called that evening, I answered. "You went behind my back," I said. She sighed. "I tried to help. You tried to regain control." "You're letting them paint you as the villain," she snapped. "I'm letting them see the whole picture," I replied, "including the parts I don't like." There was a pause. "They're asking me questions, Linda." "I know, and I don't know what to say." "You can say the truth," I said. "Not a curated version, just the truth." Karen laughed softly. "You think that's simple, Lest. It's simpler than leverage." Silence stretched between us. "They're asking about you too," she said finally. "That's fair. You're not scared?" "I am," I admitted. "But I'm not hiding." She didn't respond. The call ended without goodbye. That weekend, I received a formal request from North Star's legal team. They wanted a meeting. Off the record, for now. I agreed. The conference room felt exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. Same neutral colors. Same glass walls meant to signal transparency without offering it. The faces across from me were different, but the tone was familiar. They spoke about optics, about liability, about moving forward. I spoke about responsibility. At one point, a man I didn't recognize said, "You understand that acknowledging fault opens doors." "I understand," I said. They were already open. The meeting ended without resolution, which, I realized later, was its own kind of outcome. On Sunday evening, I sat on the back porch as the sun dipped low, painting the yard in long shadows. The cicadas were loud again, relentless, indifferent to human narratives. I thought about Karen. About Elaine. About the younger version of myself, who'd believed that choosing the least disruptive option was the same as choosing the right one. I'd been wrong, not because I hadn't cared, but because I'd prioritized stability over truth and then convinced myself they were the same thing. As the light faded, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not victory, alignment. For the first time, my words, my actions, and my memory occupied the same space. There was no gap to manage, no silence to maintain. Whatever came next, investigations, criticism, consequences, I would meet it without flinching. Because this time, the story wasn't being pulled out of me piece by piece. I was offering it whole, and that, I knew, would change everything that followed. The questions stopped feeling personal once they became procedural. That was the shift I hadn't anticipated. Somewhere between the second interview with the EOC and the third call from North Star's legal counsel, I stopped feeling like a person under scrutiny and started feeling like a record being audited. Dates mattered more than motives. Language mattered more than intent. Everyone wanted to know not what I felt, but what I did and when. I answered everything the same way. Clearly, without embellishment, without defensiveness. Karen's name surfaced more often than I expected. Did your sister have access to internal documents? Did she contact former employees on your behalf? Were any communications made through her that you were not aware of? Each question was neutral on its face. None of them were neutral in effect. I didn't authorize her to act for me, I said each time. I didn't instruct her to contact anyone, end quote. And did she act independently? Yes. The interviewer made a note. I could tell by the way her pen paused that it mattered. 2 days later, Elaine called. I wanted to give you a heads up, she said. My attorney was contacted. About what? Your sister. I closed my eyes. They asked whether she'd pressured me to frame things a certain way, Elaine continued. Whether she'd implied that your cooperation depended on how I spoke publicly. And what did you say? I said no, Elaine replied, because that wasn't what happened. I exhaled. Thank you. But, she added, I did tell them she was invested. More than seemed appropriate. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after dark, staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the window. I thought of Karen as a child, bare feet, scraped knees, always testing limits. I thought of how often I'd stepped in, smoothing edges, softening consequences. Had I taught her this? Not the tactics, but the permission? The next morning, my lawyer called early. They want to talk to Karen, he said, formally. That was inevitable. Yes, he agreed. But here's the complication. Her communications are now being reviewed as potential interference. With what? With witness narratives, he said carefully, and possibly with the integrity of the process. I said nothing. This doesn't come back on you legally, he added. But it changes the shape of things. How? It reframes you, he said, from decision maker to subject. That afternoon, Karen showed up at my door. She looked different, tired, unpolished, no practiced composure. They're calling me, she said without preamble. I stepped aside and let her in. They think I manipulated this, she continued. They think I pushed Elaine. Did you? I asked. She hesitated. I asked questions. That wasn't the question. Karen sank into a chair. I believed you wouldn't move unless you were forced. And you decided to be the force. Yes, she snapped. Because you never listen unless the ground shifts. I sat across from her. The ground didn't need to shift. I did. She looked up, eyes sharp. Only after everything exploded. After I saw it clearly, I corrected. There's a difference. They're painting me as a manipulator, she said. As if I did this for attention. You didn't. She looked away. Karen, I said gently, what did you want from this? She swallowed. I wanted you to stop being untouchable. And then, she said quietly, I wanted you to see what it's like to have no one smooth things over. The honesty startled me. I've lived my whole life cleaning up after your choices, she continued. Do you know what that does to someone? Being the problem while you're the solution? I held her gaze. Do you know what it does to someone to carry responsibility they can't put down? Silence fell between us, heavier than before. They're asking if I coerced Elaine, Karen said finally. Did you? No, she said, but I hoped she'd say certain things. That's not nothing, I replied. I didn't make her lie. No, I agreed. You tried to shape the truth. She flinched. They're going to ask why, I continued. And the answer can't be me. Karen laughed bitterly. It always is. Not this time, I said. This time, it's about you. Her eyes flashed. You're throwing me under the bus. No, I said calmly. I'm stepping out of the way. She stood abruptly. So that's it? You get to walk out clean and I take the hit? I'm not clean, I said. I'm accountable, and I'm expendable. You're responsible, I corrected. There's a difference. Karen stared at me, searching for something permission, maybe, or absolution. I gave her neither. They'll ask you whether you acted on my behalf, I said. You need to answer truthfully. And if the truth makes me look bad? Then that's the cost, I replied. Just like it was for Elaine. Just like it is for me. She shook her head slowly. You always did know how to stand in the middle. I'm not in the middle, I said. I'm exactly where I should have been 20 years ago. Karen left without another word. The next week brought confirmation of what I'd suspected. The EEOC notified me that their review had expanded. Not to include new allegations against me, but to examine third-party interference. Karen's name was listed, formally, in the notice. North Star's legal team went silent. The journalist emailed to say they were holding off on a follow-up piece. There are complications, he wrote. The narrative is shifting. It was. For the first time since this began, the story was no longer about whether I'd done something wrong. It was about whether someone else had tried to control how that wrong was told. Elaine called again. I heard about your sister, she said. Yes. I don't want this to become about her, Elaine added. I don't want my experience turned into a family drama. It won't, I said. Not from me. She paused. You know, when she first contacted me, I thought she was helping you. I know. And now? Now, Elaine said carefully. I think she was helping herself. I closed my eyes. The truth, once spoken plainly, had a way of settling where it belonged. By Friday, Karen's messages stopped. No calls, no texts, nothing. I didn't reach out. Instead, I focused on the final piece I'd avoided until now, my own reckoning. Not with process or public perception, but with motive. Why I'd chosen silence back then. Why it had felt safer than confrontation. It wasn't just fear of disruption. It was the comfort of being indispensable. The quiet power of being the one who kept things moving, no matter the cost to others. That realization stung more than any headline could. When my lawyer called with the update, his tone was measured. They're satisfied with your cooperation, he said. No further action recommended against you. And Karen? He hesitated. That's still developing. I thanked him and ended the call. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the same yard I'd watered so carefully weeks ago. The grass had grown uneven in places. I hadn't noticed. Or maybe I had, and it just hadn't mattered. I thought about how easily the story could have gone another way, how close I'd come to letting someone else speak for me, again. The twist, I realized, wasn't that I'd been wrong all along. It was that the moment I stopped trying to manage the truth, it stopped being a weapon. For me, for Elaine, and, perhaps most unexpectedly, for Karen, whatever came next would be harder for her. I knew that, but it would finally be hers to face. And that, for the first time in our shared history, felt like the right kind of separation. The hardest part wasn't the waiting. It was the absence of noise. For weeks, my life had been filled with phone calls, emails, calendar holds labeled confidential, voices asking for clarification, context, verification. Then, almost without warning, it all went quiet, not resolved quiet, like a courtroom after the jury has been sent out, when no one knows whether to sit or stand. I woke up each morning expecting something to break the silence. A headline, a voicemail, a knock at the door. Instead, there was nothing. At first, the quiet felt like relief. I could grocery shop without feeling watched. I could walk the neighborhood without sensing eyes linger too long. Diane waved like she always had. The delivery truck stopped idling across the street. But relief didn't last. It never does when you're waiting to find out what something has cost you. I filled my days with structure, morning walks, afternoon reading. I reorganized the hall closet, then the garage. Tasks with edges. Tasks that ended. I avoided anything that required reflection because reflection had become a kind of trapdoor step too close and you'd fall straight through. One afternoon, I received a letter from the EEOC. Not certified, no dramatic language, just a summary. They thanked me for my cooperation. They acknowledged my voluntary disclosure, They noted that while my actions had contributed to an environment that failed to protect an employee, there was no basis for individual enforcement at this time. No vindication, no condemnation, just a closing paragraph and a signature. I set the letter down and waited for something to happen inside me. A rush, a release, guilt, lifting, maybe. Nothing did. That evening, Elaine called. They told me they're proceeding, she said. Not against you, against the company. I'm glad, I replied. I didn't expect that from you, she said gently. Neither did I. There was a pause. I want you to know, Elaine continued, that your statement changed how this feels. Not the past, but the present. That matters to me, I said. It should, she replied. You didn't erase what happened. You acknowledged it. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table long after dark, hands folded, thinking about how rare acknowledgement actually is, how often people want absolution without admission, closure without discomfort. I didn't get closure. I got alignment. And that, I was learning, came with its own consequences. Karen hadn't contacted me in weeks. I heard about her indirectly through my lawyer, who mentioned she'd retained counsel, through a mutual acquaintance who asked carefully whether things were okay between you and your sister. Through silence that stretched long enough to feel intentional, I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that care had been my default currency with her, and that default had distorted everything else. One morning, I found a box on my front porch. No note, no knock. Inside were a few things Karen had left behind. A scarf, a paperback novel, a small framed photo of the two of us as teenagers, arms slung awkwardly around each other. I stared at the photo longer than I meant to. We looked so unsure of ourselves then, as if we were both waiting for someone to tell us who we were supposed to be. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper. Not a letter, just a sentence. I didn't mean for it to turn into this. I sat down on the porch step and read it again. Neither of us had. But intention doesn't cancel impact. It never has. The following week, North Star issued a public statement, carefully worded, corporate. They acknowledged historical shortcomings, announced a review of internal policies, committed to future transparency. My name wasn't mentioned. I didn't feel relieved by that omission. I felt erased, which was strange, considering how long I'd worked to stay invisible. I realized then that anonymity after accountability doesn't feel like protection. It feels like being set aside. I turned down an invitation to speak at a panel discussion on corporate ethics. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't trust the format. Panels turn responsibility into performance. I wasn't interested in performing. Instead, I wrote. Not a memoir, not an exposé, just notes, reflections, questions I wished I'd asked sooner. I didn't know who they were for. Maybe no one. One afternoon, as I was writing, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old instinct, control the terms. But something in me had shifted. I answered. Linda, a voice said, hesitant. It's Karen. I closed my eyes. Hi. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I wasn't either, I said honestly. She sounded different. Less sharp, less certain. They told me they're not pursuing anything formal, she said. No charges, no findings, just notes. That's good, I replied. It doesn't feel good, she said. It feels unfinished. Yes, I said. That's what accountability feels like. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't expect you to let go, she said finally. I didn't either, I replied. I thought you'd fight me, she continued. Or shut down. Or try to fix it. I stopped fixing things that aren't mine, I said. She let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to exist without pushing. That's not something I can teach you, I said gently. And it's not something I should. Another pause. I miss you, she said. I felt the words land, heavy but real. I miss you too, I said. But missing someone doesn't mean going back to how things were. I know, she whispered. We didn't make plans. We didn't resolve anything. We just acknowledged where we were. When the call ended, I didn't feel lighter. I felt steadier. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself, really looked. The lines were deeper than they'd been a month ago, or maybe I'd just started noticing them. My eyes looked clearer, less guarded. For years, I'd believed that being ethical meant minimizing harm. I understand now how incomplete that definition was. Sometimes ethics demands visibility. Sometimes it demands that you stand still and let the consequences arrive without rearranging the furniture first. I'd done that. Not perfectly, not heroically, but fully. As I turned off the light and went to bed, I thought about the younger version of myself, the one in that conference room, asking how to move a problem without admitting fault. I couldn't speak to her anymore, but I could live in a way that didn't require her silence to hold things together. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They came in pieces, spaced out just enough to make each one feel manageable, and then cumulative. The first was professional, though I no longer had a profession in the formal sense. A nonprofit I'd volunteered with for years sent a polite email thanking me for my service and explaining that, given recent public developments, they were pausing my involvement until things settled. No accusation, no judgment, just distance, neatly worded. I read it twice and replied with a single sentence. I understand. I did understand. Organizations don't like ambiguity. I'd spent decades teaching that. The second consequence was social. Invitations slowed, then stopped. Diane still waved, but she didn't linger anymore. At book club, the conversation stayed carefully on novels, weather, grandchildren, anything that couldn't be traced back to me. I wasn't excluded. I was neutralized. That was worse. Neutralization looks like kindness from a distance. It feels like being wrapped in bubble wrap and set aside so nothing else gets damaged. I stopped going after the third meeting where no one met my eyes. The third consequence was internal, and it took the longest to recognize. One morning, I woke up and realized I was no longer rehearsing explanations in my head. No more imaginary conversations where I clarified intent or contextualized decisions. No more mental edits. The absence of that noise was unsettling. For so long, I'd lived with a low-level hum of justification running in the background, like an appliance you forget is on until it shuts off. When it did, the silence felt exposed, vulnerable, honest. I filled the space with small rituals, coffee on the porch, evening walks just before sunset, writing, though I no longer tried to shape the words into anything publishable. I wrote to understand, not to persuade. One afternoon, Elaine emailed me again. They've offered mediation, she wrote. I'm considering it. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar urge to advise, to suggest, to step in. It rose automatically, like muscle memory. Then I let it pass. Whatever you decide, I replied. I support it. Her response came quickly. That's new for you, she wrote. I smiled at the screen. She wasn't wrong. Karen didn't reach out again. Not that week. Not the next. I heard through my lawyer that she'd been cautioned formally, nothing punitive, but clear enough to sting. Her involvement had been noted, documented, remembered. For the first time in our lives, she was carrying something I couldn't lift for her. I wondered if that felt like abandonment. I wondered if this was what I'd done to Elaine, decided something was survivable, and walked away. The thought stayed with me longer than I liked. Near the end of the month, the journalist emailed again. We're closing the loop on the story, he wrote. Any final thoughts? I considered the question carefully. Then, I declined. I've said what I needed to say. He respected that. Or perhaps he simply understood that the story had moved past the need for my voice. The company settled quietly with Elaine weeks later. No press release, no apology tour, just paperwork and a clause that prevented anyone from calling it justice. Elaine didn't seem disappointed. It's not perfect, she told me on our last call, but it's something I didn't have before. What's that? Choice, she said. They don't get to define what this meant to me anymore. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, thinking about how many choices I'd made on behalf of other people without realizing it. How often I'd decided what was bearable for someone else and moved on. The irony wasn't lost on me. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, I found a letter I'd written to myself years ago and never sent. It was folded into the back of a file, the paper yellowed at the edges. In it, I'd listed the reasons I stayed quiet back then. Stability, mortgage, health insurance, a belief sincerely held that change required leverage I didn't have. I read the list slowly, not with anger, but with a strange tenderness. She'd been afraid. She'd been pragmatic. She'd been wrong. All three things could be true at once. I didn't tear the letter up. I placed it back where I found it. Not to hide it, to remember. As autumn crept in, the neighborhood changed. Leaves fell, lawns browned. Decorations went up for holidays I didn't feel like celebrating. I declined invitations with less guilt than I expected. Solitude stopped feeling like exile and started feeling like space. On a cool Thursday morning, I received one last official envelope, this one from the EEOC, closing their file. No further action, no additional recommendations. I filed it away with the others, not as a trophy, as a record. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. I thought about how the story might look from the outside. An older woman reckoning with her past, paying a price, emerging quieter but intact. It wasn't wrong. It just wasn't complete. The truth was simpler and harder to summarize. I hadn't been redeemed. I hadn't been punished. I'd been seen by myself first and then by others. And once that happened, there was no going back to the version of my life that depended on being unseen. I didn't know yet what I would build in the space that created, but I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that whatever came next would not require my silence to survive. That felt like justice of a different kind. Not loud, not satisfying in the way stories like to promise, but real, and finally, unmistakably, mine. The house learned me again after everything ended. That may sound strange, but places do that. They absorb the version of you that lives inside them. For weeks, this house had held tension in its walls, the careful steps, the held breath, the feeling that any sound might trigger something waiting just beneath the surface. When it was over, not resolved but finished, the house adjusted. So did I. Mornings returned to their earlier shape, but not their earlier meaning. I still woke before the sun, still made coffee I didn't always finish. I still stood by the kitchen window, watching the street come alive in small, ordinary ways. But I no longer felt the need to rehearse who I was while I stood there. That part of me was gone. I didn't announce anything. I didn't mark the end with a gesture or a statement. Life simply resumed, lighter in some places, heavier in others. The weight had shifted, not disappeared. One afternoon, weeks after the final letter had been filed away, I took a box of documents to the shredder in my garage. Old duplicates, notes that no longer served a purpose. I fed the papers through slowly, listening to the mechanical grind, watching words disappear into thin strips. When I reached the end, I stopped. At the bottom of the box was the statement I'd written for myself, the one I'd never shared publicly. The one that wasn't strategic or careful, just true. I held it for a long moment, then I placed it in a folder and set it on a shelf. Not everything needs to be destroyed to lose its power. Some things just need to be acknowledged and set down. Karen never came back to the house. We spoke once more, months later, in a brief exchange that felt both necessary and incomplete. She told me she'd moved cities, that she was working on things. I didn't ask what that meant. For once, I didn't need to. "I hope you're okay," she said. "I hope you are too," I replied. We didn't apologize. We didn't revisit the past. We let the call end where it needed to. It wasn't reconciliation. It was separation without cruelty. That, I learned, is sometimes the best version available. Elaine sent me a handwritten note around the same time. Not long, Just a few lines, written carefully, deliberately. "I'm starting something new," she wrote. "It's small, but it's mine. I wanted you to know." I read it twice, then placed it in the same folder as my statement. Not because they belonged together, because they represented two ends of the same truth. Winter came quietly that year. No dramatic storms, just colder mornings, shorter days. I took to walking in the late afternoon, when the light softened and the neighborhood seemed to exhale. People still recognized me. Some nodded, some looked away. A few stopped to talk, carefully, as if stepping around something fragile. I let them. I no longer needed to manage their comfort. One evening, as I walked past the park at the edge of the neighborhood, I sat on a bench and watched a woman help her elderly father into a car. She adjusted his coat, waited patiently as he moved slowly, deliberately. She didn't rush him. She didn't apologize for the time it took. It struck me then how often I'd mistaken efficiency for care. How many times I'd moved people along because it felt kinder than stopping to sit with discomfort. That realization didn't come with shame, just clarity. At home, I turned on a lamp in the living room and sat in the quiet, not filling it with television or music. The silence no longer felt like something I had to justify. It felt earned. I thought about the woman I'd been when all this began, the one watering her lawn, believing that order was the same as safety, that if things looked calm enough on the surface, they would stay that way underneath. She wasn't foolish. She was human, but she was wrong. The truth doesn't stay buried because it's forgotten. It stays buried because someone decides it should, and that decision carries weight, whether you acknowledge it or not. I had carried it for 20 years. I don't carry it anymore. That doesn't mean I'm free of it. It means I've stopped pretending it isn't mine. There are days I still feel the loss of certainty, of standing, of the illusion that being careful guarantees being right. There are moments when I miss the version of myself who knew how to smooth things over, who could make problems disappear with the right phrasing and the right silence. But I don't miss the cost. I don't miss the quiet compromises that added up to something I couldn't name but always felt. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I hesitate even to call it that, it's not about courage or redemption or doing the right thing at the last possible moment. It's simpler. Silence is not neutral. It never has been. And once you understand that, you can no longer use it without knowing exactly what you're paying. I paid. Not all at once, not dramatically, but fully. And now, when I stand at my kitchen window in the morning, watching the street wake up, I don't feel the need to explain myself to anyone, not even to the woman I used to be. That, more than anything else, is what justice looks like at this age. Not loud, not clean, but honest enough to live with, and quiet in a way that finally belongs to me.